Welcome to From Rome Info Video. My name is Brother Alexis Bugnolo, and this is a live program on the question of traditionalism versus Sedevacantism, and which is the Catholic response. And I have not given anyone advance notice of this live stream because I am not a professional YouTuber. I want to get the information out there. And since I have 12,000 subscribers on this channel, some of you will come on live and the others can watch it following. And I've never done a program on this topic. And though I'm the publisher of From Rome Info, FromRome.info, which is an online electronic journal published here from Rome, Italy. And for those of you who don't know, I'm a Franciscan brother of private vows. I'm a former member of the Franciscan Friars of the Immaculate. And I've been publishing From Rome since 2013, and in the format of an electronic journal since 2020, just right before the pandemic was declared. And if you notice the graphic on today's program, the images I placed on that graphic are significant and have to do with the topic of this video. So in the background, you see Pope Leo XIV, Cardinal Prevost. And then in the foreground, you see Pope Nicholas II at the center. And on this side of him, you'll see Archbishop Marcel Lefebvre, the founder of the Society of St. Pius X, whose technical name is I believe, the Society of Jesus and Mary, or the Sacred Hearts of Jesus and Mary, I think is his original name. And on the other side, you'll see an image of Archbishop Pierre-Martin Thuc. I don't know how to pronounce the Vietnamese surname, Nong Do Thuc, who was a cousin of the last Catholic president of Vietnam before it fell to the communists. So first, a little biography on all these individuals. So if you don't know this argument, you'll get an introduction, and that will give me some time to wait for people to come on the live stream. If you are watching this live, say hello in the chat. This program will be entirely in the English language. Questa indiretta sarà interamente nella lingua inglese. And YouTube might add subtitles a day late, but they'll always be wrong because they purposely instruct their AI not to record my voice, not to translate my voice correctly into subtitles. Okay, so a little background about each individual. We'll begin with Nicholas II, since he's first chronologically. He was elected Pope in May of 1058, and he was crowned Pope in the Basilica of the Lateran December 31st, if I remember the date correctly, 1058, and he was Pope until the end of 1059, 1060. I think he passed away in the summer of 1060. So he was only Pope for a year and a half, which wasn't unusual for medieval popes because it's a burdensome office, and medieval popes who elected were usually quite advanced in age when they were elected. And well, if you're not Italian, the weather in Italy is not so good. Medieval Rome was a very unclean place without any kind of sanitation, so popes really didn't live long. And Nicholas II, his name is actually Guy, or Guido, you might say, of Burgundy. He was brother of the Count of Burgundy, and he was of the royal house of Burgundy, which shortly hereafter, in the next generation, the whole kingdom of Burgundy will become part of the German Empire and a possession of the King of Germany, or at least in a sense of a jurisdiction. and the Kingdom of Burgundy doesn't exist anymore, but it was all that part of France, which is on the west side of the Alps and the west side of the Rhine, going up to the borders of Lorraine. So just about where the town of Arc is, where Joan of Arc was born, and Burgundy ended. And it didn't go much beyond the Rhone River, included Avignon and Provence. And Pope Nicholas II, before he was elected, was Bishop of Florence, and very much connected with the imperial government in Italy. The Vicar of Italy was also the Margrave of Tuscany, had his headquarters also in Florence. And Nicholas II was elected in a very controversial moment of the church when the nobility of Rome and the honest clergy, especially in the Benedictine order, and the imperial house in Germany, all three of them were at war over who would control the papacy. And the previous Pope, Stephen IX, was a Benedictine. St. Hildebrand, who goes on to be Gregory VII, is a Benedictine. St. Peter Damian, who was a cardinal, who voted for Nicholas II, is also Benedictine. He was a hermit bishop, I think, of Gubbio. So you had those three warring factions. And in 1058, when Stephen IX was dying, he ordered the Roman clergy not to conduct the election of his successor until St. Hildebrand would return from the imperial court at Goslar in Thuringia. And the clergy of Rome didn't do that. So we have to understand that in 1058, we are still in the ancient regime, you might say, where the popes were elected by an assembly. I'll call it an assembly of apostolic right, in which all the clergy, all the religious, and all the laity came together, or at least the majority of them, and in a public piazza debated and then elected one person or the other. And there was really no rules. And so Italians, being hot-headed as they are, unless there's very strict rules, Italians get in fights. And it was not infrequent. There was strong conflict. So Hildebrand hadn't returned. The clergy and nobility and laity of Rome did not obey the Roman pontiff, Stephen IX's precept, and they elected John Minucius, Bishop of Velletri, and he took the name of Benedict X. He was already a bishop, so they just crowned him Roman pontiff. And when Hildebrand returned to Rome, he said, "This election is invalid. Monsignor Minucius, you must resign. You're not the Pope." And Benedict X, John Minucius, had the Frangipani behind him, which was a very powerful Italian family from the town of Tusculum, which today is called Frascati. And they drove Hildebrand and Cardinal Umberto di Salvacandida and Cardinal Peter Damian out of the city, force of arms. And they had to flee, and they fled all the way to Siena with perhaps a few nobility and perhaps a few laity. It's not certain in that record. And then there they elected Guy of Burgundy, the Bishop of Florence, as Nicholas II. So that's who Nicholas II is. And then the year following, after the imperial court backs Nicholas II and he gets some troops, they re-enter the city. They hold a council of Sutri. Benedict X is declared an anti-pope and excommunicated. And then the Margrave of Tuscany's troops enter the city and take control, and Nicholas II is enthroned as Roman pontiff. And then 4 months later, at the Great Synod, Roman Synod, in April 13th, 14th, at the Patriarchal Constantine Basilica of the Lateran, St. John Lateran, we call it today, 130 bishops were convoked to council by Nicholas II. And in the presence of St. Hildebrand and St. Peter Damian, Nicholas II issues a bull called In Nomine Domini, And you can find a translation. You can find an English translation of that at From Rome, and I'll put a link in the show notes after this feed ends. And you can find an Italian translation of that at chiesaromano.info. And I'm the author of both of those translations, and I think I'm the only person who has translated that bull into more than one language ever in the history of the church. And my English translation is the most recent English translation done. I think it's also the most accurate because it's based on the actual papal text, which I got from a scholar who spent his lifetime studying that bull. And the Italian is based on that. There is an Italian translation, very rough and vague, floating out there in some old HTML version on the internet. And there is an English translation, another English translation out there that I distributed from Rome, which is an interpolation. It isn't the actual text. And from Rome, you can even get the imperial version, because of the bull there is the official church version. It's called the papal version, and then there is the imperial version, the version that was recorded in the registers of the Holy Roman Emperors. And the imperial version of every papal document is not the papal document. It's what they wanted the papal document to say. But it's interesting to notice how they wanted to manipulate that. And if you're stopping by, say hello in the chat. So that's who Nicholas II is. So now I'll talk about the other individuals. I'll begin chronologically with Bishop Thuk, because he's less known, and the reason why I mention Archbishop Thuk as I'm taking him as the chief figure of the Sedevacantism movement. I'm taking Archbishop Lefebvre as the chief figure of the Traditionalist movement, not because there are no Sedevacantists other than those who have episcopal orders or sacraments through the apostolic succession of Bishop Thuk, and not because there are no traditionalists who have who don't have the sacraments of the apostolic succession of Archbishop Lefebvre, but just as archetypes of both movements. So first, let's talk about the life of Archbishop Thuk. He was a Vietnamese Catholic prelate who served as Archbishop of Hue in the Republic of Vietnam from 1960 to 1968. He was born the 6th of October, 1897, and died the 13th of December, 1984. So he had a long life, and he saw lots of things change in the French colony of Vietnam. He was twice excommunicated for consecrating bishops without permission of the Vatican. I think Paul VI and John Paul II. He was from the Ngo family in South Vietnam, who in the years leading up to the Vietnam War was the founder of Dalat University. While in Rome, attending the second session of the Second Vatican Council, the 1963 South Vietnamese coup d'etat overthrew and assassinated his younger brother, Nguyen Dien Diem, who was then president of South Vietnam, and Nguyen Ngo Dien Nhu. Thuk was unable to return to Vietnam and lived the rest of his life in exile in Italy, France, and the United States. So the first thing to understand about Archbishop Thuk is that he came from a very powerful political family whose family members were assassinated by the CIA. We now know that the assassinations of both of his relatives was undertaken by the CIA at direct request of Allen Dulles. And this was during the presidency of John Fitzgerald Kennedy, JFK, but not with his approval. He was out for holiday over a weekend, and Dulles ordered the assassinations and the overthrow of the government. And when Kennedy came back from vacation, it was already done. And they assassinated Kennedy three months later. So it was the CIA getting rid of Catholic leaders. So obviously Archbishop Thuk's, he was a father of Second Vatican Council. His view, he and his all the bishops and clergy that as it were, descend by him through sacramental ordination. They've never been a group in the church that has the favor of the deep state. They have always been considered the enemies of the CIA, or the CIA considers them an enemy. And consequently, you almost never hear about them. Most people don't know about them. And most Catholics who even go to the Latin Mass never heard of them, other than they might see that there's a Latin Mass by Sedevacantism. So in the United States, I think there's at least three bishops that descend from Thuc, and correct me if I'm wrong. Let me read their names out to me so I get it right. Bishop Mark A. Pirvarunas of Omaha, Nebraska, where he heads his seminary called Mater Dei Seminary. And then there is the Most Reverend Charles J. McGuire out of Westchester, Ohio. And there's the Most Reverend Marcus Ramola of Fairfield, Ohio. That's in the United States. Oh, and also the Most Reverend Giles Butler of Rochester, New York. So there's actually four. The others that I could track down for their addresses are the Most Reverend Bade Okechukwa Nakmuke of the Seminary Sede Sapiense in Akwa Ibom, Nigeria. Monsignor Luis Madrigal of the Chapel of Christ the King, Cristo Rey, in Zapopan, Jalisco, Mexico. And Monsignor Martin Davila Gandara of the Church of the Divine Providence de la Divina Providencia in Acapulco, Guerrero State, Mexico. So there are probably others, but I couldn't track them down and identify them because it's hard to get information on the bishops who descend from Thuc. And generally, these bishops describe themselves all as Sedevacantists. Okay. And so that's an Archbishop Thuc. He begins by consecrating some men in southern Spain who are called the Palmarist sect. And I've heard that they were Sedevacantists too, and they elected their own pope. And I think there's a good number of like 60 priests they ordained and stuff, Palmyra de Troya, as you might say, and they claimed that their founder claimed to have had visions. It is said that they're a homosexual cult. I have no evidence of that, but that's what is said about them. And their first bishop, at least, was consecrated by Thuc, who gave some credence to these apparitions from Our Lady and didn't know the moral turpitude that was going on among these individuals. And after that, Archbishop Thuc consecrated 2 traditionalist priests from Mexico, and from them basically comes the other. He consecrated a few other individuals with basically this consecration. So, and all these groups from Thuc hold the position of Sedevacantism. I'll describe that in a moment. Now I'll talk about Archbishop Marcel Lefebvre. Archbishop Marcel Lefebvre is the founder of the Society of St. Pius X, and he was also one of the fathers of the Second Vatican Council. But he has a very different relationship with the state than Archbishop Thuc, because Archbishop Marcel Lefebvre's father was an MI6 agent, was a spy, ran the whole Belgian spy network for the United Kingdom during the First World War, and he ran that out of the Netherlands. And it wasn't called MI6 back then, but to be a member of that organization, you had to be a member of the Royal Arch Freemasons. And we know that Bishop Lenart, who consecrates Archbishop Lefebvre, a priest and a bishop, was a Freemason. And we know that Archbishop Lefebvre's Society of St. Pius X has very strong backing of French military intelligence, always has. and very strong financial support from that part of Switzerland where the banks were enriched through Nazi money. So the Traditionalist Movement Society of St. Pius X is very strongly supported by the CIA and French intelligence and British intelligence, not so much by Italian intelligence, but or in the Hispanic-speaking world, precisely because it worked hand in hand with the NATO Gladio movement, the Habsburgs, and a lot of other traditionalist organizations to maintain the anti-communist sentiments in Europe. Although the Traditionalist movement was not founded by Archbishop Lefebvre, if we want to go back to who it was founded by, it wasn't even founded by Archbishop Thouck. It was begun by a priest who was a professor of canon law and theology at the Catholic Cemetery in Maryland, and his name will come to me in a moment, I suppose. But once the and this is an important fact about Archbishop Lefebvre. So he didn't immediately reject the council. He actually signed all the council documents. But some 4 seminarians came to him in like 1968, 69. He decided to found a seminary at Cone. At the beginning, Cone is the diocese of Sion, S-I-O-N, which is just upriver from Lake Geneva in Switzerland. Lake Geneva is on the border of France and Switzerland today. And I have actually been to Cone to see the seminary. And he first gets permission, and then a few years later has it removed, and then he is suspended ad divinis by Paul VI, and then since his health started failing, realized that the Society of St. Pius X couldn't go on unless it had other bishops. He consecrates 4 bishops in the 80s, and he is excommunicated, and John Paul II declares him excommunicated for that, even though Pope Benedict XVI will declare those excommunications no longer in effect, because there wasn't really a canonical foundation for it, since Archbishop Lefebvre didn't intend schism. And those 4 bishops are bishops of the Catholic Church, except Monsignor Williamson went on to consecrate some bishops under Pope Francis, and Pope Francis excommunicated him. And I think there's now 4 or 6 along that line. So alive today in the world is like, I think, 8. Oh, and then there was a bishop in Brazil. Oh, and then there was a bishop in Brazil who didn't accept the council, Bishop Rifan, and he was actually present at the consecration of the 4 bishops by Marcel Lefebvre, and was a co-consecrator. And not Rifan, but later Rifan is one of the priests of this Brazilian bishop, is consecrated. So he actually has Episcopal descent also from Lefebvre. So I see there's only one of you. So this is not really a good hour, I see, for the English speakers to follow this. Most of my English speakers are in the West, but this video will be viewable all tomorrow on Sunday, so you'll be able to find it all throughout the day of Saturday and tomorrow Sunday. So I'll continue anyhow, even though I see this live stream is not so live. So that's Archbishop Lefebvre, and the Society of St. Pius X went on to have, I think it has like 750 priests and seminarians, and maybe a dozen or so religious orders that are under their care. And I think there's more Catholics who attend their masses in France on a Sunday than there are who attend the mass en français. And they're very influential in the English-speaking world. They're very influential in the parts of the world that are controlled by the CIA, French military intelligence, and British military intelligence. That doesn't mean you don't find them in Spain or Latin America, but generally you don't. And you're going to find them in countries of the British Commonwealth and those under the influence of the United States or NATO, most of all. And the orders the Society of St. Pius X is extremely wealthy and has extremely wealthy benefactors. They run a chain of hotels in France, and some of the most wealthiest and influential individuals are somehow associated with the Society of St. Pius X, even members of European nobility, like the House of Bourbon. So we know more about the Society of Pius X. They have a greater presence on social media. They are not as much censored. Although a fair number of Sedevacantist individual laymen and clergy you can find even on social media, where they try to conduct apostolate, since no one pretty much knows about them otherwise. And I can commiserate with that, because being an anti-globalist, I'm completely censored on the platform and no one gets my notifications. You see, I have 12,000 subscribers on this channel, and there's currently no one in the live stream because YouTube won't send out the notifications for my channel. But I'll embed this video later at From Rome so people come to know of it. So that is the hold a sec here. Let me see what can I find. To get some more people on the stream, I will share this on my at From Rome, because it appears that YouTube hasn't sent notifications out to anyone. Okay, excuse me a moment while I do this little technical maneuver here. And so those are the individuals that you'll see in the, and then there's Pope Leo XIV. He's the other face you see on the thumbnail of this video. And his real name is Robert Francis Vigitano Prevost Martinez. And he was born in Chicago. He's the grandson of an adulterer by the name of Rigitano, who, to hide his adultery, took the paternal name of his wife, Prevost. He then went to Villanova University. First he went to a seminary, a high school seminary in Michigan, and then he went on to, because his mother wanted him to get a good education. And we'll have more people pouring in the live stream soon, because I just sent out the notification at From Rome. Let me just boost that distribution of email so everyone will get a notice about it. Okay, so, and then he goes to Villanova, and which was run by the Augustinians, and then he joins their order. Quite to the surprise of his two brothers, he has two older brothers. And then he studies for the priesthood of Chicago Theological Union, which was completely heretical in the late 70s, early 80s. And then he becomes an Augustinian monk. He takes his vows and is a missionary in Peru for the rest of his basic career, until around the year 2000, where he's elected provincial of the Augustinians in the United States, becomes their superior, covers up pedophilia, and then is elected the minister general of their whole order, and goes to Rome in about just before Benedict resigns. Then is appointed by Pope Francis as Bishop of Chiclayo in Peru, where he had served as an Augustinian, and then is promoted to the dicastery for bishops in 2023 by Pope Francis, because Prevost, and that was requested by Bill Clinton and Alex Soros, because Prevost is a distant cousin of Hillary Clinton. and he's a committed globalist and Bergoglian heretic. And he was elected in the Invalid Conclave of May 7th, 8th this year of 2025. Okay, so now everyone has a live stream and they'll be coming in. So that's who Leo the 14th is, and he took the name because he wants to grift off the name of Pope Leo the 13th, but mostly because he's a socialist, and that's who the 4 people on it. So now let's talk about the 2 main topics. If you just come to the live stream, everything before this moment, actually, you haven't missed anything because I've done a long introduction because knowing that people would take time to come to this live stream. And now the 2 topics, traditionalism and Sedevacantism. I'll talk about these 2 positions, and then we'll talk about whether they're Catholic or not. First, traditionalism. So traditionalism is a position that many Catholics take, which holds to some degree that the documents of the Second Vatican Council are problematic. Now, there are those who hold that if they're read in the right light, you can avoid the problems. And that's basically the position of Cardinal Ratzinger, Pope Benedict XVI. And there are those who hold that the heretical need to be gotten rid of and totally abolished, or at least they're so erroneous, it should totally be jettisoned. And that there was a manipulation going on in the council, and that they don't represent the Catholic faith or Catholic religion in any authentic way, because the fathers of the Second Vatican Council didn't invoke the Holy Spirit, and the Holy Spirit wasn't there. And if you don't ask for grace, you don't get it. And they didn't intend to teach infallibly, so it's really their human opinions, erroneous opinions, and often with heretical or destructively or recklessly inexact language, if not intentionally ambiguous. And some traditionalists hold that this council isn't valid because Paul VI or John the 23rd were doctrinally errant. But basically what distinguishes traditionalism is that they're not going to question the canonical validity of the conclaves from 1958 going forward. But they are, in some way, not going to accept the council. And so some traditionalists will attend the sacraments in the new rites, and some won't. All of them prefer the old rites, and some of them follow the Missal of 62, like Society of St. Pius X, and others will follow the Missal like a 58 or 48 or whatever. And the traditionalists will hold that the popes are either heretics or apostates or deceived, and therefore we don't have to obey them. And some traditionalists will obey the local bishops and join groups like the Fraternity of St. Peter or the Institute of Christ the King, and only have practiced the traditional Catholic faith where the bishops permit them to do that. Some will set up independent chapels and disobey the bishop, and some will do it within groups like the Society of St. Pius X. It basically says the bishops have authority. The popes after Vatican II have authority, but we're not going to follow it when it comes to the traditional sacrament. But we're not going to, and in groups like the Society of St. Pius X, if you say that Paul VI wasn't a true pope, or he lost his office because of heresy, or you say that about any pope from John 23rd up to Leo the 14th, you'll basically be kicked out of the chapel or denied the sacrament or denied absolution. And that's the tradition. That's what distinguishes traditionalism, what they call traditionalism. So the word traditionalist, we have to understand, is the name of a heresy condemned at Vatican I. And the term traditionalism at Vatican I means something different. It means that the position in which you hold that all truth comes from your ancestors. And that concept of traditionalism as opposed to the other era, rationalism, which all truth comes through the use of the rational faculties of man. And Vatican I takes the position that in matters of religion, truth comes from God by revealing it, and it is protected. It is entrusted to the church, and it is protected by the infallibility of the church, of which the charism of infallibility of the Roman Pontiff, when teaching and official acts that are to be accepted in matters of faith and morals for the whole church, is infallible. But the church does concede that in matters of empirical sciences, it's reason, it's the use of man's rational faculties that allows him to go from observation to a true understanding of the world. And that in many human customs and cultural practices, the truth of good comportment does come from tradition and custom. Okay, so the church, to a limited extent, accepts a realm in which reason and tradition have their preeminence. Okay, even though in all matters, whether it has to do with tradition or the use of reason or any field, it's the revealed truths that have the primacy. Okay, so that's traditionalism. With Sedevacantism, and I'll talk about Sedevacantism. Sedevacantism, traditionalism. First, before I get to talk about Sedevacantism, traditionalism is a term which is in the public medium considered more like an honor to use. You call yourself a traditional Catholic, you state position. Pretty much there's no stigma on the term being a traditionalist or being a traditional Catholic. Okay, I'll say that right from the start. Whereas Sedevacantism is a term that is despised. If someone calls themselves a Sedevacantist, pretty much 99% of Catholics will stop listening to them. And if you hold a position anywhere similar to their position, that there haven't been popes since A, B, C, or X, Y, Z, Catholics will call you a Sedevacantist and stop listening to you. And any Catholic who believes the Conclave, for example, in 2025 was canonically irregular is being called pretty much a Sedevacantist. And Sedevacantists, I don't know where the term Sedevacantism comes from. I could look it up, I suppose. But it is a term that tries to pigeonhole their position. So not everyone who holds that some pope after Pius XII wasn't a true pope, and that therefore we don't have true popes today, holds Sedevacantism, whereas all of them would be called Sedevacantists. So Sedevacantism as an ideology, I define as the position in which there can't ever again be true popes, because there was some moral, doctrinal, or canonical defect in the election of some pope, beginning with John the 23rd. Of course, you could choose any pope in history and hold that. A Catholic who holds that a pope is not a pope because he's a heretic or because the conclave was invalid, he shouldn't, in my opinion, call himself a Sedevacantist, because he is using a label that other people put on him. This happened during the discussion of whether Benedict was still the Pope or not, where Peter Skocek created, or if he didn't create it, he's popularized the term Benevacantist, which was completely irrational name, but they still used it to disparage Catholics who, when Catholics started talking about the invalidity of Benedict's renunciation from the point of view of canon law and the use of terminology, to avoid a rational discussion. Skocek and people like Steve O'Reilly, who was actually a retired CIA agent, they invented this slur Benevacantis, and people held that Benedict was still the Pope. Certainly weren't I think that the Apostolic See was in Sedevacante. Okay. But not all who hold that the Church currently doesn't have a validly elected Pope hold it as an ideology. Okay, so this is an important thing. So ism added to a word means an ideology. That's why the Catholics of the United Kingdom don't even like the phrase Catholicism, because that was invented to disparage the Catholic faith as some kind of mind control system. Okay, but generally speaking, all isms are, in a certain sense, the attempt to project on reality an idea about reality that's false, whether we talk about scientism or communism or Marxism or socialism, and even empiricism, in the physical sciences. So when I say traditionalism and Sedevacantism, I don't mean to disparage either term, and I don't mean it in an ideologic sense, although some people might take it that way. So ideologically, the Sedevacantist probably doesn't exist, but it would be the individual who holds that in the most extreme position, that my personal judgment that this conclave was invalid or that pope fell into heresy is a certitude that can't be discussed. And therefore, we don't have a true pope. And the chaos in the church now is so great that we can never have ever again a pope. And I don't think there's a there might be individual Sedevacantists who hold that opinion, but I think that would be like the most extreme exaggeration of what that opinion is. Most of them will say that we don't have a true pope now, and it is possible in the future. Although I am not familiar with any of the discussions on how we would ever get a true pope again. So a good number of Sedevacantists are going to hold that the sacramental forms used after Vatican II in the Aggiornamento are invalid or doubtful. And for example, Gary Dufresne, with whom I spoke earlier this year, he holds that there are no Catholic clergy at Rome except those who were ordained priests before 1968. Okay, before the new missal comes out, the new pontifical comes out, which means it'd be, there'd be cardinal, there'd be Burke, but he wouldn't be a cardinal. And then there are no cardinals because there's been no valid popes since Pius XII, and there are no cardinals nominated by Pius XII that are still alive. So strict Sedevacantists will hold juridically that there are no cardinals at Rome. And I guess logically, if they're going to be logical, they'll hold that there aren't been no valid conclaves because only cardinals can vote in a conclave. And they're going to hold that the law for conclaves is that of Pius XII, which no conclave of cardinals has followed since Paul VI came out with his law. Now John Paul II has his law. So I'll let in the comments or here in the live stream, if there are any Sedevacantists or those familiar with their position, answer the question of how do you get back to a true pope? Because if you hold there is no pope and you claim to be a Catholic and you hold that the papacy is of divine institution, how do you get back to that? Now, there are some laymen who take the position of Sedevacantism, but they mix it with private revelation. They believe there's not going to be any more popes. And that occurs even among non-traditionalists and non-Sedevacantists. Lots of the followers of Andrea Cianci or of Don Minutella here in Italy basically hold there will never be a Catholic pope again. We're in end times and Christ is ready to come. So don't even worry about it, which I would hold to be an extreme kind of apocalypticism, okay? Because the Catholic Church has always taught there will be popes, successors, St. Peter, into the end of time. Though the Church doesn't say that there always has to be a validly elected pope in every year, nor how many years has to go between one valid pope and another. The longest, I think, historically on record, recognized by universally by Catholic historians, is like 2.5 years, okay, during the conclave of 1271, 1274 at Viterbo, where the whole idea of conclave, locking people up, came into being. And that was during the lifetime of Saint Bonaventure and Thomas Aquinas. And in their writings, I don't think they say anything about it, because these things happened in the Middle Ages. Even for example, Urban II, Blessed Urban II, calls the First Crusade. Had been a sedevacante for like 11 months before his election. even though at Rome there was an anti-pope of the imperial faction. So the sedevacantist is a term where if you label someone or you label yourself a sedevacantist, pretty much no one will talk to you. And this has to do with Archbishop Thuc being considered by the CIA as their enemy, and Archbishop Lefebvre's close association with British and French military intelligence. So you will be allowed to get information on social media about traditionalists, but pretty much it will be very difficult for you to find information about sedevacantists. And a matter of fact, from the point of view of websites, the so-called sedevacantists have very, I'd say very inadequate, I won't say shoddy or non-existent websites. They don't seem to have people that know how to do a website, and they don't seem to have many online publications. So, for example, if I compare it to my own electronic journal From Rome, which has 45,000 comments and 10,000 articles, I don't think whether among traditionalists or sedevacantists there is a publication like that at all. Although there might be among so-called conservatives, pro-Vatican II Catholics. And so consequently, it's very hard to find information about sedevacantists. And they have seminaries. And probably the most famous tract writer among them is Father Cicada, who is a former priest of the Society of St. Pius X, and then later started working with bishops in the lineage of Archbishop Thuc. And greetings to the 6 of you watching. Say hello in chat. You don't have to be a subscriber to say hello. And you can ask me any question. I'm not doing this live stream just to listen to myself. So that's what the terms traditionalism and sedevacantism mean. And that's who are the people on the thumbnail of this program. Pope Nicholas II, Archbishop Pierre Martin Nungo Thuc, Archbishop Marcel Lefebvre, and Pope Leo XIV, our Father Robert Francis Rigitano Prevost Martinez. And from the point of view of ethnicity, since I have a degree in cultural anthropology, Thuc is Vietnamese. I don't think there's any French blood in his family. Archbishop Lefebvre is French from Lille, which is on the border of Belgium, just on the French side, and from an old French lineage. And Prevost is a mixture. His grandfather Rigitano is from Milazzo, like my maternal great-grandfather. He's also from Milazzo, so it's like Paisani. But then his mother Martinez appears to be Jewish, because she descends on the maternal line from a woman called Koppel from Louisiana. And his grandmother is French, Prevost. That's where she gets the name. So he is French, Sicilian, Jewish, okay, ethnicity. And that's why the very day he was elected, he issues a statement to the Jews. It's because he knows he's Jewish. I mean, he was studying Hebrew even before he became an Augustinian. Ken McRae, greetings from Ontario, Canada. Okay. Yeah, and ask me a question quick. So I am not an expert on what sedevacantism is, or even the Thuc lineage. And if you are a sedevacantist listening to this program, you're going to say, brother, you don't know half of all the details, and you're getting it wrong, and you're not pronouncing his name right. I concede all that, because it's hard to get information about you guys, okay? It is just so hard, and that's because you are not friends of the deep state, as far as I can tell. You have no connections with the CIA, French military intelligence, British military intelligence, or Mexican military intelligence, or Spanish military intelligence. And certainly, I don't think Italian military intelligence. And I don't think any of your members are Freemasons, where it seems highly likely Archbishop Lefebvre or the members of the Society of St. Pius X. If they were not Freemasons, at least they have friends in Freemasonry. And the evidence to this fact is that when the seminary at Cologne was founded, they would have religious processions. They still have religious processions. And for the first 5 years, they hired the local Masonic lodge band to play music for their procession. So if you think Society of St. Pius X has nothing to do with Freemasonry, I think you need to wake up and smell the coffee. Okay. And the other evidence that Society of St. Pius X is probably run by Freemasons is that everyone knows Jorge Mary Bergoglio is a Freemason. I mean, his own head of security in the Vatican Nunciature in Argentina said on a telephone call that was intercepted by the Argentine police, "I'm a Freemason and Bergoglio is a Freemason." And that was reported widely on Argentine television, several stations. And as soon as Pope Francis was elected, there was the Freemasons praised his election, and he even wrote a letter to the Freemasons, and that was published in here in Italy, which was quite scandalous. So there was no doubt that that Bergoglio was a Freemason. And who was the group of traditionalists that was diehard Bergoglio is not a heretic and we're in communion with Pope Francis? It was the Society of St. Pius X. So they had no problems about Bergoglio being a Freemason, and they didn't have any problems about the band being Freemasons. And well, Archbishop Lefebvre's father probably was a Freemason, at least worked with him in British intelligence. And I'm informed that French military intelligence and Freemasonry in France really doesn't have a problem with the Society of St. Pius X. Society of St. Pius X also encouraged, until recently, Catholics who went to their chapels not to oppose Vatican II, not to try to take back parishes or convince Novus Ordo clergy to give up Vatican II or start the Latin Mass in their parishes, or to question the authority of Vatican II, or oppose it. And the fact that Society of St. Pius X has closed down 9 out of every 10 chapels that were donated to them, and doesn't provide people who go to their chapels with any pastoral care. It's basically, come to our chapel for Mass, but we're not going to be your pastors or help to save your souls. And that's a very common complaint against the Society of St. Pius X. We won't even talk about pedophilia. There have been Sedevacantists involved in pedophilia, but there have been many more priests in Society of St. Pius X. And of course, the conservatives have it and the liberals have it. It's a very widespread phenomena. You have this thing about Palmar Torres and the fact they're homosexuals. I don't really know if Archbishop Thuku knew anything about that. So I haven't heard anyone saying, there was Sukart, who founded one of the first traditionalist groups in the United States, who I think was convicted on 2 or 3 counts of pedophilia, child abuse or sexual abuse. And he founded a group in the United States. Let me look up the actual name of just to get it right, because I don't want to make a statement that's not true. This is a very serious matter. Yeah, Francis Schuckart, Schuckardt. He founded the Congregation of Mary Immaculate Queen, which is called CMRI, and they run like 40 traditionalist chapels in the United States currently, and they're currently led by Bishop Privanas. But Schuckart himself was found guilty in civil courts for sexual abuse and drug use. He was expelled by their organization for that, and he was their founder. Okay, so he was born in 1937, died 2006. And how did he see? He was a member of the Blue Army of Our Lady of Fatima. I was too. That was a very popular organization in the years back. He founded a traditionalist community in Coeur d'Alene called Fatima Crusade in 1968, and they distributed lots of booklets. I even found one in my parish at St. Anthony, a Padua parish in Portsmouth, Rhode Island, and I said those prayers very frequently, not knowing where they were from. He was ordained a bishop by Daniel Q. Brown of the North American Old Roman Catholic Church, which was a group not in communion with Rome before the council, and he begins their organization. So, and he was a Sedevacantist. So, former seminarians reported that they were sexually abused by him in April of 1984, and then there were financial misconduct allegations. They were forced to leave Seattle, Washington. Let's see, what was about the legal claims against him? And there was a legal dispute over their property at Mount St. Michael's. That was in 1984. Then they moved to Greenville, California. For the remainder of his life, Sukkar, after being expelled, lived in the Seattle area and founded a new group that had 100 members. And declared himself the Pope, I think, according to the support at Wikipedia. Okay, so Wikipedia doesn't say he was, he says he was accused, but not that he was, I don't think it says he was found guilty. Let me see. No, he was just expelled from his own organization for those accusations, not that he was found guilty in court. So I correct myself, and I don't want to damage his reputation by saying things about him that is not true. So those are the two groups and the two positions. Now, what is the Catholic? Which of these are more Catholic? And here I want to discuss the intersection of conscience, private judgment, and Catholic teaching. Because if you're a Catholic and you see all the problems that are coming out from Vatican II and all the problems subsequent, if you have as many gray hairs as mine, you've been victimized since the 80s, since you came to know what was going on in the church. I remember my parish in the 70s, they started giving communion standing rather than kneeling. People were like, what? You know, or in the hand rather than on the tongue. People were like, what? No one wanted it. So my memories go back to the first years of implementing Vatican II. I was baptized in 1964 in the old rite, but I received confirmation in the new rite in 1978. So you know something about me. And I thank God I was baptized in the old rite because I got the exorcisms. But if you don't know your Catholic faith well, and you see all the problems in the church, how are you going to resolve them? So if you don't know what the church's teachings are, you're going to fall back to private judgment. You're going to make a decision that's not well informed because you don't have the information. You know, how many Catholics have this book, which is the Catholic Catechism by Cardinal Gaspari? How many have a copy of the Baltimore Catechism? How many have a copy of the Catechism of the Council of Trent? But even if you have those, they don't give you any answer to these problems. And how many have a copy of the Code of Canon Law of 1917 or 1983? And how many could read it in the Latin or understand it even in English? Because if you haven't studied canon law, how would you understand how to read it? So consequently, when Catholics run into the problems of the church since the council and run into these two groups of traditionalists or Sedevacantists, or whether you're even a member of that group, how do you answer that? You go back through all the manuals of theology, and nothing like this has ever happened in the church, because Vatican II is not a problem of the kind of there was during Arianism or the ancient heresies or even the Reformation. Vatican II is is an event organized, funded, and manipulated by the US government from the beginning and Western intelligence agencies. They planned this in 1953, and that's why Our Lady starts crying at Syracuse and has that wonderful miracle of Our Lady's tears at Syracuse. And you can read about this from Rome. In the sidebar, there's a thing, the CIA planned the destruction of the Catholic Church, the ideological warfare program waged by the US government to destroy the Catholic Church from within. And it's still going on. And a matter of fact, that Prevost is Pope has everything to do with this program. Okay. And it is a diabolic program, but it is a program being led by Western intelligence agencies. So consequently, since they control the internet and since they control social media, getting the message out about this is not something easy. I mean, look, I have 12,000 followers on this channel, and I have 7 watching this live stream. Didn't the 12,000 get the notice? You can be sure the 12,000 didn't get the notice. I'd be surprised if 200 got the notice. And I published it from Rome, so now all 500 of my readers from Rome know about this, so they can watch there. But I see there's only 7 watching. Probably because of the hour of the night in the United States, English-speaking world. Well, those, if any of you are from Australia, New Zealand, or South New Zealand, you say hello because it's Saturday evening down where you are, and so you might be watching. And if you have a question, you can answer the question. So if you're Catholic and you don't know these things, you can't even find books that tell you how to really answer these problems. So we have 2 problems. Are these popes heretics? Or are these popes validly elected? Okay, those are the 2 fundamental issues. And you can have different opinions on either. They're validly elected or not. So the Sedevacantists are going to say pretty much that they'll be silent. They'll say John the 23rd is invalidly elected, pretty much. But they won't specifically address that about the other popes, because what they say is he's a heretic. Whereas the traditionalists will hold that they're validly elected, but they might be heretics or they are heretics. So those are the 2 distinctions, because these 2 separate questions. Now, what do you do when you have an invalid pope or heretical pope? If you ask both these groups, they're not really clear on the solution. And this is my big beef, as we say in American English, with this, because if you're going to say there's a problem, then what is the solution? And if you're going to spend 5, 6, 7 decades describing the problem, talking about the problem, shouldn't you spend at least 1 month trying to find the solution? Okay. And I use this analogy often because I have the deepest respect for women. I learned that growing up. And when I hear a woman scream or shout out that someone's attacking her, I'm extremely sensible to that. And so when Holy Mother Church is being raped for 70 years, how can you tolerate that? How can you talk about that, write books about that, do websites about that, denounce that, preach against that, but not want to stop that? Now, both of these groups actually are in total agreement pretty much on the liturgy. They both do the traditional Roman rite. They both do the traditional sacraments and using the traditional formulas. Not all the laity that follow each group go to only the Latin Mass, okay? Or there might be Catholics who go to a Sedevacantist chapel one Sunday and the next Sunday go to a Nova Soda Mass in communion with Pope Leo XIV. So the laity aren't as consistent, they're more pragmatic from that point of view. And I don't know if these chapels even monitor whether they have laity attending them of that kind or not. But what is the solution? You're not going to solve the problem by founding a chapel in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, and having a traditional Latin Mass. You're not solving the problem by ordaining bishops or consecrating priests. That's not solving the problem. The problem can only be solved by getting a Catholic Pope at Rome, by restoring the papacy. It should be obvious. Now, there's 8 of you listening. Say in the comments whether what I just said is common sense, if you're watching this live. That's common sense. The only solution is having a validly elected Catholic Pope at Rome. That is the only solution to this problem. You can write books, you can spill ink, you can ordain priests, you can found monasteries. That's not solving the problem, because that's not the source of the problem. Okay. And that should be obvious to everyone. And since that's the solution to the problem, then that is the Catholic response. But if you don't know how to solve that problem, you might end up in the position, Ken McCrae, his common sense, you might end up in the position where you don't think there's a solution. So I can't blame the laity, and I can't really even blame the religious or clergy, or even the bishops in each of these two groups, Sedevacantists and Traditionalists. Because if they don't know what the solution is, can we expect them to invent a solution? No, it's not their job to invent a solution. And some of them, not knowing what the solution is, have given themselves up to certain private interpretations or theological opinions, which, can you blame that they end up in those positions? You can't blame it, because they're trying to solve the problem intellectually, but they don't have the information. So I'm not putting myself out superior to anyone, but I'll show you that I do know Latin. Hold a second. So, like Pope Sixtus V declared, there are two primary doctors in the church. One is St. Thomas Aquinas, and the other is St. Bonaventure. And here's my 996-page translation of Bonaventure's commentary on the first book of Master Peter Lombard, written in 1252 at the University of Paris. And it's a textbook on the theology of the Trinity. And you can see it, I even did footnotes and everything like that. And forgive this self-promotion. But the money raised from this book doesn't go to me, but it's $50 a copy, and in the United States, it is some shipping added to that. And you can get this book sent to you anywhere in the world. Although if it goes outside the United States, expect to pay $100 or $150 just in shipping. But I'm the first person to translate this into any language in the world since Bonaventure died. And I not only translated the first volume, I translated the second and the third volume, which are also just as long, although they're not published because I don't have benefactors with money willing to pay to get them published. So I'm not saying I am the greatest Latin scholar in the history of the church, or even the greatest Latin scholar today, but I've at least proven by publishing this with the help of my benefactors, God bless you all, and back in 2014, that shows you I know Latin, and I am a medievalist. Even though I'm trained in cultural anthropology, I worked out a system where I translated this, and just in comparison, but not to boast, but to show you this is not an easy work, 25 Italian scholars of Bonaventure who know Latin spent 10 years trying to translate this first volume. They got to page 100 and they gave up. And so when I attended in 2016 the conference of these scholars at Bagnoregio, and I brought this book along, and they were like, "What? You translated the entire thing in English? How long did it take you?" I said, "It took me 18 months." And they're like, they all said they'd buy a copy, but none of them bought a copy. And to this day, these Italian scholars didn't buy a copy of this book. Because this book, my translation embarrasses them. It embarrasses medievalists that I'm able to do something. I can translate this, each tome of a book like this, I can translate in 18 months. Because I developed the system, and I knew my Latin, and I used the dictionary. And one professor at the Gregorian University says this is one of the finest English translations of any medieval text of scholastic theology that's ever been done. And it makes it easy to read. But I had an advantage because I already studied Latin, because I was already a Franciscan, so Bonaventure is a Franciscan, and because Bonaventure's master at the University of Paris was Alexander of Hales, who was an Englishman, and so he was already instructing Bonaventure to use Latin in kind of a way that we now use English. So the Italians have a hard time thinking the way we English people think, but the Latin in Bonaventure is more in the English style than the Italian style. So I'm not saying I'm an absolute expert, but since I have training in anthropology and archaeology, I approached it from a different point of view. Thank you, Ken. If you want to buy a copy of that book, you'll help the publisher, because the publisher is spending $250 every month to store 2,500 copies of that book, which still haven't been sold, or maybe 3,000 copies, because 4,000 copies were published. And I have a benefactor that's just throwing money to the wind to keep these books from being thrown in the garbage, because if the storage isn't paid, they'll be thrown in the garbage. And as I say, only about 400 copies of the 4,000 have ever been sold. Another 600 were donated to libraries around the world, Catholic libraries. So you can help the publisher. The money doesn't go to me, but it's a fascinating read, and I consider it one of the best Christmas presents you can give to any priest, whether he's traditionalist, Sedevacantist, or modernist. Even if he's Anglican not a priest, but if he's an Anglican minister, Lutheran minister, or almost any kind of Protestant minister, because they basically all hold that before the Reformation, the Christian faith was right. And any church that believes in the Trinity, if they open this book up, they'll probably end up becoming Catholic, because it is so well explained. Bonaventure was a university professor, and he's easier to understand than Thomas Aquinas. Okay. YZT, Don Minatella needs your canonical orientation to help him. Don Minatella has learned a lot from me on canon law just from listening to me, and he's interviewed me a couple times, but I don't think Don Minatella would take any advice from me anymore. I'll say only that. Even Chanchi, after the death of Pope Francis, has given himself up to the theory that the conclave was valid because 30 cardinals held a secret secondary meeting, and here's all the proofs on it, reading these special signs and mystical meanings of this and that. And he had a very big following, but now he has a very small following in Italy. So here in Italy, we are, and both Andrea Cianci and Don Minatella's families are associated with Italian military intelligence. I'll just say that. Okay. I am one of the most hated persons in the whole world. I have no connections in myself or my family to any military intelligence. My father was one of the first to criticize the corruption in the deep state way back in the 70s on ham radio, and he was visited by the FBI and blacklisted and persecuted his whole life, harassed, and they tried to run him off the road and all kinds of things. So my family is definitely not friends of the deep state, no one in it. And so only common pew-sitting Catholics listen to me, because your ability to find what I say or read what I write is already an error in the mechanism of control. And it's not an intended consequence of the internet or of social media. And proof of that is that there's 8 people watching this stream, though I have 12,000 viewers, because most of you are blocked, and it's not going to be a video suggested. And my readers are pretty much not addicted to the internet, so they're not watching every moment to see if I publish anything and rushing to read it. That's not what my readers are. My readers are rational, sane folk that have real lives and jobs and things like that. They're not paid to troll anyone or things like that kind. And I am not on social media. I don't have a Facebook account. I don't have a Twitter account. I don't have an Instagram account. I only have From Rome Info, the electronic journal I publish. And although I do have YouTube channels, there's From Rome Info Video and From Rome Info. And I have another one called Brother Alexis Bugnolo. Those are the ones I do in my own name. Okay. So what is my position on all of this? My position is that we need a solution. And the solution we have to find in the laws of the church, or in the teaching of the magisterium, because I am a papalist. I accept the entire Catholic faith as it has always been taught, the way it was always taught at the death of Pius XII. I don't believe there's any other kind of Catholic faith than that. That's the Catholic faith. I'm a Roman Catholic. I've received all my sacraments in the Roman Rite, although occasionally I will attend the Byzantine Rite, like with the Ukrainian Catholic Church. But and I actually find the Byzantine Rite of the St. John Chrysostom more beautiful than the Roman Rite. And I prefer the Latin Rite, although I understand Catholics who want it in English, they understand what's going on. But I don't think the Novus Ordo is of God, and I think it should cease to be practiced. I think it be practiced. The traditional Latin Mass in the vernacular, if it was done right, and I'm a translator, I know that's not easy to do it right, and there could a lot of mischievous error. But I know I could translate the traditional Latin Mass into a good English, and it would be powerful. It would be really, really powerful if people hear those words translated right. But whether it can be done in other languages is not entirely certain. Like Italian is not as robust vocabulary, nor are a lot of other modern languages. And it might be even hard to make it sound beautiful in certain languages, like German. You probably wouldn't sound beautiful in German, and it would probably nearly impossible to translate it into like Polish or Arabic. Maybe not so difficult to translate into Spanish, which is closer to the Latin, has kept the Latin tradition. Portuguese, I'm not so sure. But many other languages, it would be impossible to translate the Latin liturgy into their language because they just don't have the vocabulary. And if you're going to worship God, you have to use words with precise meanings. Otherwise, you're slobbering in the presence of a king. You shouldn't do that. Which is why celebrating the Roman Rite in the Latin language or the other rites of the church in their ancient languages is the most sane thing to do. Because if you're going to stand before the altar of God and speak to God, the Father, Son, Holy Spirit, you better darn use the best language you can use to speak in the most precise way you can speak, and then in the most correct way. Just as if you had an audience with King Charles of England, you wouldn't go there and speak in a slurry English accent. Okay, you try to speak in the best British English you can. Okay, same reason. And as for Vatican II, I think the whole thing should be thrown in the garbage. I used to own a copy of Vatican II documents, but I think in the 90s I threw it in the garbage can. And I don't even get in this. I hardly get in a discussion on what to quote anything from Vatican II because it's a waste of time. It's a waste of time even in the Latin. If you look at the Latin of Vatican II, it is no better than the lousy English translations. It's just hogwash. It's slop theology, and to say that slop theology should be the foundation of a renewal in the church is simply an irrational statement. You have to be insane to say that. That'd be like saying if you want to repair the most beautiful Mercedes-Benz, we should use a book written by a bicycle repairman from some third world country and not get an expert from France or Germany to do it. Okay? It's the same thing. If you're going to renew the church, you better go back to the most solid dogmatic statements and the writings of the most clear and brilliant theologians and doctors of the church or fathers of the church. You shouldn't be celebrating Mass according to something that was written on a napkin in an Italian restaurant. That's exactly right, Kay. If you try to do an exorcism of Satan and you're not using precise language, you're not going to scare him at all. You're going to make him laugh, even though technically speaking, angels can't laugh. But that's exactly right. That's why only exorcisms in ancient sacred languages freak out the demons, because especially if we say the prayers in the original languages. For example, the exorcisms in Latin, you're reciting all the prayers they hate most of all, like the Hail Mary, the Our Father, and the Magnificat. They hate those prayers. Or even readings from the Gospels, they hate them. And I'm sure if you did an exorcism in Greek and New Testament Greek, it would be just as effective because they hate those words. They've heard them for centuries and it just drives them crazy. But if you're going to do it in California style English, they're going to break out laughing. They're going to think you're doing a comedy show and not an exorcism. and rightfully so, because the angels are highly rational individuals, and although they don't have a sense of humor, they must have something analogous to that. Okay. It's okay. So I see that there's now 8 of you watching, and I thank you for the thumbs up. Ask a question. Okay, you're Polish? Okay. So, yeah, if you're Polish and you know English, then you know that how difficult it is to translate things from English to Polish. I had one benefactor try to translate something to me in English and Polish, and it was like, it took us 3 months to work out a text. And after it was all worked out, 3, 4 years later, another Pole said to me, that translation's worthless. It doesn't say anything of like what yours says in English. It's all, everything's watered down and made mellow. I said, oh, well. EMS asked me, have you ever read Animus Ignorandi, 1 and 2 by Attila Cinque Gomez? I have read several books, but I didn't get the whole series, okay, for several reasons. One, he is a prolific scholar. So if you read any of his books, he did a whole series on Vatican II. I think it was like 12 volumes. And it was written in Portuguese, Brazilian Portuguese, and then it was translated by Tradition and Action in Southern California. And the reason why, after I think I read the first 2 volumes years ago, back in the 90s, but I didn't after that, because I'm not the kind of person who likes opening up a sewer and watching the things that flow by and describing them. I'm not that kind of person. That kind of thing doesn't interest me. And so I'm sure there's a lot I don't know that I could know if I went through and waded through all the other sewage he describes. So I don't deny that they're books worth having and keeping. And I think the English, I think the English translation done by Tradition and Action is probably very good. So you want a copy of those on your bookshelf, do buy all their copies of it. I don't know if they're even all in print. But why do you ask me, MS, about those particular volumes, Animus Ignorandi? Because he did some volumes called Animus Delendi also. Okay, so as you see, you can ask a question. Any of you can ask a question on it. So the Catholic solution to Vatican II is not an easy one, because how can you get a Catholic Pope validly elected at Rome? Unless the cardinals validly, and even if, unless the cardinals validly elect one, who will accept him? Okay, so I have wavered between traditionalism and Sedevacantism as hypothetical possibilities for like 30 years. Though I found more attractive the idea that just don't obey a superior who's in error. But I have never accepted the idea that you should break the law according to your private judgment. And so I am a hermit, a Franciscan hermit of private vows, but I don't seek permission, a recognition from the local bishop. And here in Italy, that doesn't bother them. But in the United States, if they don't give you their permission, they want you out of the diocese. And I'm not involved in any parish apostolates. I don't serve Mass, whether in Latin or English. I don't get involved in what's going in the sanctuary. I'm not a member of the clergy, so I don't have to. And I've taken the position since the 90s, just don't participate in error. But also don't participate in canonical irregularities. Don't do things that are actual canonical crimes. So my position is has always been what's called in morals tutiorism, or taking the safest path, which in moral questions, all moral questions, is not absolutely necessary, but in juridical questions is absolutely necessary, because it is an obligation of baptism to obey the laws of the church. That is an obligation of baptism. It is a grave obligation. If you don't obey the laws of the church, you cannot be saved. Boniface VIII in his bull Unum Sanctum, you can find this on the internet, says if you don't submit to the Roman Pontiff, you can't be submit. If you're not submissive to the Roman Pontiff, you can't be saved. The corollary of that is if you don't obey the laws of the church, you can't be saved. And this is not just a requirement for cardinals, bishops, priests, deacons, religious. It's also a requirement for laymen. If you don't obey the laws of the church on marriage, you can't be saved. And that's usually but if you don't obey the laws regarding sacraments, you can't be saved. That's why we Catholics don't attend the liturgies of the Greek Orthodox or Russian Orthodox or Syrian Orthodox and Melkite Orthodox. We don't, because that would be to violate the laws of the church. We receive sacraments communion with the Apostolic See, with the Catholic Church. And that's why many Catholics don't attend the traditional Latin Mass when it is offered in chapels of Sedevacantists or even the Society of St. Pius X, where the bishops and priests were not consecrated with the permission of the hierarchy that's in communion with Rome. And give me a break of a minute. I'll get something to drink. My throat is getting dry. So what is a Catholic to do? A Catholic could become a traditionalist, a Catholic could become a sedevacantist, or a Catholic could try to survive in the parishes. It's kind of called conservative Catholicism. A Catholic could follow these errors and become like a modernist. A Catholic could try to separate himself from what's going on, like I do, to survive, and pray that God come and save us. And this year, Jesus Christ has created this. Has created the conditions in which I broke that. God has come to save us. No, I never said the Society of St. Pius X or Sedevacantists. If you listen to the beginning of this whole stream, I make the distinction between Sedevacantists and traditionalists, and I clearly put Society of St. Pius X in the camp of traditionalists. They're not Sedevacantists, and if any of their members become Sedevacantists, they expel them, like Father Chiqueta was expelled. But this year, our Lord has come to our salvation because he has allowed his enemies to so blacken themselves that the conclave of 2025 is clearly invalid. And whether you're a Sedevacantist, or whether you're a traditionalist, or whether you're a conservative, or whether you're a modernist, there is sufficient evidence for you to see that the conclave of 2025 is invalid. So we can all come together, like Michael Matt says, unite the clans. We should be able to all come together this year of our Lord 2025 and say, Leo the 14th is not the Catholic Pope, is not the Pope. Whether because he's a heretic, and Cum ex apostolatus officius says heretics, the election of heretics is invalid, or whether you say the cardinals that elected him were invalid cardinals and therefore he's not the Pope, whether you say he violated the papal law of John Paul II, which they did when they voted with 133 cardinals, claiming to use a dispensation which was totally invented, but the papal law in paragraph 4 does not allow dispensations. And they didn't claim to have a derogation, so the election's invalid. The Catholic solution then is the teaching of Nicholas II. And I know this because I'm a medievalist, and I searched for the name of that bull, and I found scholars that talked about it. I already knew about this bull from like 2015 because I published it from Rome. I've already discussed what is done, the whole concept of apostolic right, and I arrived at the same position that Nicholas II taught before I knew what Nicholas II taught, because it's, if you know jurisprudence, then you know how to answer questions. If you don't know the principles of jurisprudence, then you don't know how to solve problems. So it's kind of like moral theology. You can know the Ten Commandments, but that may not give you clarity on whether, um, if your wife has a medical problem, you can still, as a husband, have relations with her, or whether you have to abstain so as to avoid um, moral consequences that would result in the death of a child, let us say. I don't want to get any more explicit than that. Complex questions require that you understand moral principles very much. And priests are supposed to be trained that way. But before the council, only the best priests were allowed to hear confessions because they understood how to handle that. Since the council, almost every priest is allowed to hear confessions, and most of them, I'd say, I can tell you that in my lifetime, probably 1% of the priests I've gone to confession know how to hear confession because they don't know their moral cases. And well, I won't even talk about that they have the grace to hear confession, because you can excuse sins and lead person to commit more, or you can be so bitter towards the sinner in the confessional that you break them down psychologically and he falls into worse sins. And so it's very hard to find a priest who knows how to help you in confession. You really have to prepare for it yourself very well and get yourself obtain from God as much grace you can, have people pray for you to have a really an effective confession that's going to change your life, which is what confession's for. Okay, so I'm not going to say which is the better Catholic solution. So from the yeah, I kind of set everyone up as on the title of my program, Traditionalism versus Sedevacantism, which is the Catholic response? Because in a way, they're both Catholic responses. I mean, I'm not going to deny that traditionalists and Sedevacantists, who are so devoted to the faith that has always been, just as conservative Catholics are devoted to the faith that's always been, that these people aren't Catholics. Okay. What is the more Catholic solution? I wouldn't say that one is better than the other. For example, if heresy is a horrible thing, and the Sedevacantists say that superiors who are heretics lose their office, they're basically following the teaching of Paul IV and in Cum Ex Apostolatus Officio. And that is the better argument on heresy. But when it comes to remaining in communion with the Apostolic See and not accused of heresy, or putting in doubt without warrant the validity of papal elections, the traditionalists have a better position. So I wouldn't say one is better than the other. If we measure, for example, if you were going to buy a house and there were two houses that you're considering buying, and one had better appliances, but the other had a better paint job and garden and land piece of property, which is better? We really want a house that has both, right? And the Catholic position has the best parts of both, traditionalism, Sedevacantism, with something that both don't have. And that's because they don't know of the bull of Pope Nicholas II. Because we should hold to the Catholic faith the way it always was, and both have that position. And we both should obey a validly elected pope and remain in communion with him. The traditionalists want to remain in communion with him, and the Sedevacantists want a validly elected pope. But we should want a validly elected pope as much as we want to obey our legitimate superiors and not make an excuse because they're in error or heretics or something like that. Because the Catholic position has all these truths in one. And the Catholic position is taught by Nicholas II in his bull in Nomine Domini, which he wrote with the counsel of St. Hildebrand and St. Peter Damian, one of the greatest, that is St. Gregory VII, one of the greatest popes of the Middle Ages for the liberty of the Catholic religion, and the moral rectitude of the clergy, and then St. Peter Damian, who wrote a whole book against the homo heresy and is a doctor of the church. and was a saint that worked many miracles. I don't think Saint Hildebrand. Saint Hildebrand. There's several miracles attributed to Hildebrand during his life, but Peter Damian, there's quite a number, and after their death, they both worked miracles. So the Catholic solution has all these, and the Catholic solution is having a Catholic Pope validly elected at Rome, who is going to say, let's just dump Vatican II and get out of this matrix, CIA matrix of lies and of the adjournamento. And this year we can do that because, as I said, we should all agree the conclave of 2025 is invalid because it is objectively invalid. It's not invalid because I suspect there was something going on in the conclave. It's not invalid because I decide who can elect the Pope. It's invalid because it is objectively, the manner in which it was conducted is objectively not the manner in which John Paul II says it should be conducted. And whether you think John Paul II is a valid Pope or not, okay. If it didn't follow even his law, then it didn't follow any law. It certainly didn't follow the law of Pius XII. So if anyone thinks that only cardinals nominated by Pius XII can validly elect the Pope, then you also agree with everyone else that the conclave is invalid because it didn't follow the law of Pius XII. So the Sedevacantists should say the conclave is invalid because it didn't follow the law of Pius XII and there's no more valid cardinals. The conservatives and the traditionalists should say, well, obviously it didn't follow the law of John Paul II because there was 133 cardinals instead of 120, and that is a formal precept of the law. And John Paul II says in paragraph 76, if you conduct this election in any other way than what I've established, the result is null and void, and the person elected receives no right. And no declaration of the church is necessary to declare this. So John Paul II gives everyone in 76 the right to say it's invalid. And if you don't think he's a pope, then you already believe you have the right to say it's invalid. And whether you're scrupulous about maintaining communion with the Holy See, you can't be in communion with you can't claim Leo the 14th is the Pope and simultaneously claim John Paul II was the Pope, because John Paul II established the law for conclaves. It wasn't Pope Benedict, it wasn't Pope Francis, and it's certainly not Pope Leo, and it's certainly not the cardinals. So the cardinals had to follow the law of John Paul II, and if you hold he's the Pope, then you have to hold the conclave is invalid. And here we come to the difficulty of getting this consensus is that the traditionalist movement is pretty much controlled by the deep state, as I said, because Marcel Lefebvre his father was MI6, and he was ordained a priest and consecrated a bishop by Freemasons. And the funding of the Society of St. Pius X comes out of some shady Nazi-friendly banks in eastern Switzerland, and they're supported by French military intelligence. And most of the traditionalists in the English-speaking world are tied directly or indirectly to Christendom College, which was founded by 2 CIA agents and 1 Skull and Bones member, like Michael Matt. And these individuals or have worked for the U.S. government, like Eric Sammons or Steve Riley, who is actually ex-CIA, or are members of organizations that have worked closely with the CIA, like Society of St. Pius, like Opus Dei, or Freemasonry, or are converted to the Catholic Church during the eras after Vatican II, and therefore in some way committed to the identity of Vatican II being valid. So they're not going to tell you there's a solution because their handlers don't want them to say that. They can only do a limited hangout, which is a term in intelligence in the art of spying, in which you say part of the truth to convince your victim not to oppose the agenda of your spy agency. So you tell Catholic priests, we must oppose communism. So work with our CIA agents to make sure that communists don't infiltrate your seminary. And what they're really doing is that they're infiltrating Freemasons into your seminary who are anti-communist but pro-Freemasonry. And you find cardinals that are willing to work with socialists and Marxists, and you find cardinals willing to work with Masonic political parties. But for example, you haven't found a cardinal since the time of Pius XII. Well, you haven't found a cardinal since the time of Pius IX who wants a Catholic political party and a Catholic political order. Maybe you still had some in the reign of Pius X, but you don't have any anymore. And so that pretty much means that most of them are probably Freemasons or friendly to Freemasonry, or at least grew up in such a context that they don't understand the Catholic faith outside of the Masonic order, how it could exist outside the Masonic order. So consequently, you're not going to hear there is a solution this year because the conclave is invalid, because they won't even talk about the conclave invalid. I haven't yet seen a Sedevacantist say the conclave is invalid, or a traditionalist, or a neo-traditionalist, or conservative. I'm the only one, and the readers from Rome, who's saying the conclave is invalid, except you, EMS. I noticed you've done some writing where you say the conclave is invalid, and a few other writers at Substack say the conclave is invalid for reasons different than myself, I think. But this is the solution. And the enemies of the church, whether they are demons, or whether they are Freemasons, or whether they're intelligence agents, or whether they're individuals who are controlled by these persons, or have a vested interest in the crime, like the cardinals committed this illegal conclave, because even the cardinals have their control systems. There are some people who follow Burke as if he's a prophet, and if he says, eat eggs, they eat eggs, and if he says eat ham, he'll eat ham. I'm exaggerating, of course. And there are people who follow Cardinal Sarah that way too, and they say, well, if they go along with the conclave, then I'm going to go along with it too. And that's not how a Catholic should act. Now, if you read the Bull of Nicholas III, and I'm going to read it because you need to hear these words, because it's the teaching of the Magisterium that liberates us, because the truth will set you free. And so I'll read the words of Nicholas's Bull. And if you're a reader from him, you've heard this, but I want to read it out loud because there are individuals who, for want of time or laziness, they're not going to hear it from there. So I translated this into English, so I know what it means. Let's just read what Pope Nicholas II says, how you handle an anti-pope at Rome. So this was published on the 13th of 1059, 13th of April in 1059. And the name of this bull is In Nomine Domini, which means the name of the Lord. And it was published during the Synod of Rome held in the Constantinian Patriarchal Basilica of St. John Lateran at the Rome. And I translated this text from the papal version published by Das Papstwahldekret von 1059, Echte Verstung Jasper Detlech das Papstwahldekret. And so it was a German historical publication. And you can actually download the scan of the page of the publication on my article at From Rome, and you can read along with me. I'll share this in the live stream. Okay, so here we go. Let's read the bull of Nicholas II. In the name of our Lord God, our Savior Jesus Christ, from the year of his incarnation, 1058, in the month of April, in the 12th indiction, with the sacrosanct Gospels laid open, also with the most reverend and blessed Nicholas presiding as the Apostolic Pope in the Lateran Basilica of the Patriarch, which is named the Constantinian, also with the most reverend archbishops, bishops, abbots, or venerable priests and deacons accompanying, seated the same venerable pontiff, decreeing with apostolic authority concerning the election of the highest pontiff, said, my most beloved brothers and co-bishops, and also inferior members of the clergy, your beatitude knows, and it does not lie hidden, that with the passing of our predecessor, the Lord Stephen, he's speaking of Pope Stephen IX, of pious memory, how many adverse troubles this apostolic see which I zealously serve with God's urging, has suffered through. And then how many repeated hammers and frequent blows she has been subjected to through the brokers of simoniacal heresy, so much that the column of the living God almost seemed to totter. Means the Catholic Church. And the net of the highest fisherman, with storm swelling, would be driven into the depths of the shipwreck to be submerged. He's talking about St. Peter's net. Number 1, wherefore, if it please thy brotherhood, we ought with God assisting, take care prudently for future cases. He's talking about our times. And this by ecclesiastical statute, provide in the hereafter that these evils, revived, not prevail. On which, so he's saying it's going to happen again, but we're going to stave it off. On which account, having been instructed by our predecessor and by the authority of the other holy fathers, we decree and establish that with the passing of the pontiff of this universal Roman Church, first of all, the cardinal bishops, treating the election together with the most diligent consideration, summon immediately the cardinal clerics to themselves, and in this manner let the rest of the clergy and the people approach to consent to the new election, so that, lest the deadly disease of venality insinuate itself by the occasion, the most religious men can be the chief leaders in the election of the pontificate to be promoted, but the rest be their followers. So the novelty in this bull actually is that Pope Nicholas, for the first time in the history of the Church at Rome, is going to restrict the election of the Pope to the cardinal bishops. Everyone else merely gives their assent or dissent to their decision. Whereas before it was the whole church, bishops, clergy, religious, and laity would come together, and everyone had an equal vote. Laymen and laywomen is equally as cardinals. So this is the novelty of this bull. And this bull will govern the papal elections until I think the Third Council of the Lateran in 1170, where the council imposes its own law, but then the Roman Church doesn't accept it. And then I think that the next law comes out in the 15th century. Okay, so this governs the election, for example, Innocent III and Blessed Urban II. Okay, paragraph 2. And certainly the right, because Nicholas II is changing the manner of election. He's restricting the electorate from all the faithful in the Church at Rome to just cardinal bishops. And the Pope has that authority because the right to elect the Pope belongs to the Church of Rome, and therefore it also belongs to every part of the Church of Rome. So the Pope can restrict it. And because he's doing this novel thing of restricting it, you have to remember that Nicholas II wasn't Italian, he was a Burgundian. And he and Saint Hildegard, who was Aldobrandini, a Langobard, and Peter Damian, I think was an Italian, they want to restrict it and take the right of vote away from the people, the masses, and the nobility of Rome, just so they get honest people elected. Okay. So now he has to give a reason why he's restricting the election just to bishops, because actually this wasn't accepted by the clergy and the laity of Rome for like 2 centuries. It doesn't matter because the Pope made the decision and this is the law. And all the popes that are considered true popes are elected by this law until the next Pope established his law, and all the anti-popes because they didn't follow this law. But because this was a novelty restricting the electorate, Nicholas II now has to explain his reasons, and he does this in paragraph 2. And certainly the right and legitimate order of the election is here considered carefully, if it be gathered from having examined the diverse rules of the fathers or their deeds, and even that sentence of Blessed Leo, our predecessor, who said, "No reason permits that there be had among bishops those who have neither been elected from clerics, nor requested by the common people, nor consecrated by the co-provincial bishops with the judgment of the metropolitans." And this is a quote from Pope St. Leo I in his letter to Rusticus of Narbonne, which you can find in Minge, Patrologia Latina, volume 54 on page 1203. Pope Nicholas continues. But because the Apostolic See takes precedence to all other churches throughout the earth, and for that reason too she can have over her no metropolitan, the cardinal bishops without doubt serve instead as metropolitans, who namely promote the one elected as high priest to the apex of the apostolic summit. Moreover, let them elect him from the very womb of the church if one is found suitable, and or if he is not found in her, let him be taken from another church, with due honor being served and reverence for our beloved son Henry, German king, who is held as king at present, and with God conceding, hope to be the future emperor, that's of the Holy Roman Empire, as we have already conceded to him and to his successors, who personally begged this right from this apostolic see. So Nicholas II's election, he got his support from promising the king of Germany, who was in his minority, only had 14 years, that's Henry IV, that he would receive the imperial crown, maybe crown emperor at Rome, when he attained a majority. But in this argument, too, we see that Nicholas II is creating an argument for why he's restricting the electorate. He said throughout the whole church, bishops are chosen in the province by other bishops, and they have to be either chosen by the bishops or the clergy or requested by the people. And they have to be consecrated bishops by bishops of the province. That's a rule established at the Council of Nicaea, but that is the tradition of the whole church. But then he points out that's not the tradition of the Rome, and Rome has its own rules. But it's okay if we somehow adopt this rule for ourselves. And the Pope can impose a different rule for the election as long as it keeps within apostolic right. And this is his justification for what he's doing. So this is this papal bull is a disciplinary decision, but it has lots of sections that quote apostolic tradition or ecclesiastic tradition and the fathers of the church, and it's a very good argument. His argument is not canonically imposed. So what he's canonically imposing is paragraph 1. Paragraph 2 is his argument, and it's more an argument of convenience. He's saying what I'm doing shouldn't be objected to because this is what's done in other churches, and we do something similar here at Rome. Okay, so that's paragraph 2. Now paragraph 3. This is the key paragraph for us today. And Nicholas II points out in paragraph 1 that he's establishing a law that's going to have effect in the future. So he's saying, pay attention to what I'm saying. It's prophetic. Because how to avoid these problems in the future. And this is where we're arrived at today. Number 3, wherefore, if the perversity of depraved and iniquitous men so prevail that a pure, sincere, and free election cannot be held in the city of Rome, let the cardinal bishops with religious clerics and the Catholic laity, though few, obtain the right of power, ius potestatis, to elect the pontiff of the city, where they might judge it to be more fitting, that is, to hold the election. Plainly, after the election has been completed, if there be a bellicose conflict, or if the struggle of any kind of men resists by the earnestness of their wickedness, such that he who has been elected cannot prevail to be enthroned in the apostolic see, that is at Rome, according to the custom that would be at St. John Lateran or St. Peter's, nevertheless, let the one elected, obtain as Pope the authority to rule the Roman Church and to dispose of all her faculties, which blessed Gregory the Great, we know, did before his own consecration. So here is the actual rule of the Roman Church and to dispose of all her faculties, which blessed Gregory the Great, we know, did before his own consecration. So here is the actual teaching. Now, since this is a disciplinary bull, number 3 is a disciplinary ordinance. But because Nicholas II was elected according to this teaching, the year before he became the Pope, Nicholas II is approving this as a juridical principle, which is valid even if his bull should be canceled. And this is one of the most important aspects of this bull, because subsequent popes changed the rules for the papal elections and abolished all previous laws. So this bull of Nicholas II is no longer a juridical law that has to do with the election of the Roman pontiff. But paragraph 3, since it talks about how Nicholas II himself was elected, here this paragraph contains magisterial teaching, infallible magisterial teaching, which, because this bull was used to elect popes for centuries, is part of the authentic infallible papal magisterium. And it is valid even if the bull, as a disciplinary measure, no longer is in force. And this is the key to the solution of the crisis that begins with the Second Vatican Council and it comes to its worst point with the invalid conclave of this radical heretic Prevost by 133 cardinals. And this is why I've been quoting this bull over and over and over and over again. Now, for someone who doesn't know his papal history, he might say, well, that bull's no longer in force, so it can't be followed. You respond to that by saying, how was Pope Nicholas II elected? He was elected in May of 1058 at Siena by the Cardinal Archdeacon Hildebrand of Saona, the Cardinal Bishop Peter Damian, and the Cardinal Bishop Umberto of Salvacandida, and some nobles and some laity from Rome. We don't know how many of the others. Now, according to what had been going on at Rome for the first 1,000 years, you cannot elect the Pope outside the city. The Pope had to be elected in the city. Every papal election before 1058 is in the city. Okay. So how is it that these three cardinals, some clergy and some laity, elect a pope at Siena, which is, even today, it's like 3 hours north of Rome in car. So it's a big distance. It's like 180 miles, 200 miles north of Rome. And in their day, it would probably be two weeks by horse. Maybe it's a week by horse. Okay. So it's pretty far away. And the reason why they went to Siena was that they had the protection there of the Margrave of Tuscany, and they wouldn't be attacked or harassed by anyone who accepted Benedict X as the Pope at Rome, and he was an anti-pope because he was elected because, and you know why he was an anti-pope? Because Stephen IX commanded that the election of his successor could not take place unless Saint Hildegard was present for the election. And that was a verbal declaration. We don't have the written form of it. We don't have an act of the Apostolic See. But because they violated that, the election was invalid. So all the more that the cardinals in May of 2025 of this year had 133 of them participate in the conclave, when the law of John Paul II clearly says you can only have 120, no more, you can't have more. All the more is the conclave invalid. And those who say it doesn't matter how many vote for it are individuals who are not honest, don't know law, or have never read the law, or going along with the club because they want to follow the CIA-controlled globalist narrative. They prefer their cocktail parties to being saved. And because Nicholas II was elected according to this principle, what he's saying about an illegal or election that violates the law at Rome applies now for all centuries in the future. That whenever a heretic is elected, or they elect someone who is not valid, if there's no other papal law about this, then the election can take place outside of the city. But what the other key thing about he's saying it here is he's appearing to the principle of emergency situation. Because in this first paragraph, he says, who elects the Pope? In the first paragraph, he says, the cardinal bishops treating of the election together with the most diligent consideration. So in paragraph 1, he says the cardinals elect the bishop, elect the Pope. But in paragraph 3, he says, if there's an illegal election at Rome, or an election of a heretic at Rome, or of a schismatic at Rome, who elects the Pope? Here he says it's something different. He says it's the bishops, the religious clerics, and the Catholic laity, who are the individuals of, what does he say? He says something. So he says, he goes back to, in paragraph 3, he basically revokes paragraph 1. He basically says, if the election at Rome was done illegally and can't be done legally, then I'm revoking paragraph 1 of my bull, and I'm allowing the electorate to be the whole church again, for an election anywhere. And after 1059, we see I think 12 or 13 elections not at Rome. For example, Blessed Urban II, who calls the First Crusade, he was elected at Terracina, whereas there was one pope, I forget his name, who was elected at Cluny in France, and even today, jurists hold that although the current papal law says they have to hold an election in the Sistine Chapel, there is a term in the papal law that's saying if they were prevented that by force of arms, they could hold it anywhere. But what most people don't notice in paragraph 3 of the bull of Nicholas II is that he no longer restricts it to the bishops. He allows it to go back to the full electorate. And what he's teaching here, since this paragraph 3 is a magisterial teaching, he's saying that if there's an election of a schismatic or heretic or legally the election's invalid, then the whole church again gets the right to vote. But then he says the most amazing thing. He says, even if few. So wait a moment here. Mean we don't have to get all the Catholics in the Diocese of Rome and the Suburban Diocese. We don't have to bring them all to Siena. The election could be done by just a few. And just a few in Latin is 3 or 4, okay? Because Latin has a word for 2, but few is used for 3 or more. So that means 3 individuals could elect the Pope, and he will be validly the Pope. And from the moment he's elected, he has complete authority over the Apostolic See, even if he's not enthroned and not consecrated bishop yet. Because he cites the example of Blessed Pope Gregory the Great in that same paragraph. So this is really something tremendous. This is what you call the fail-safe, okay? This is the papal fail-safe teaching. We have it from a pope, a validly elected pope. We have it from a pope whose law has never been contradicted. And this law of Nicholas II, even though as a law it's no longer valid, it contains a magisterial teaching that's valid forever about a juridical principle. Because Nicholas II's own election was according to this principle before this law existed. Therefore, the principle is valid even if the law doesn't exist. And Paul VI, in his own law for the election of popes, cites Nicholas II's bull in Nomine Domini, and he says the celebrated bull of my predecessor, Nicholas II. Celebrated means it was used frequently. So from a juridical point of view, it is indisputable that if there is a valid election at Rome, whether because there's a law violated or a heretic's elected, then if you can get 3 or 4 Roman Catholics to go anywhere in the world and to elect someone as the Pope, that person will be the Pope, and he'll have authority over the Apostolic See, even if he's not yet consecrated bishop. Obviously, it's not until he's consecrated bishop that he actually becomes the Roman Pontiff. But just from the moment he's elected, he already has authority over the Apostolic See, and all Catholics are obliged to be in communion with him. And the bishops are obliged to consecrate him a bishop. And this is a tremendous grace that 967 years ago, a pope at Rome, in a synod attended by 130 bishops at St. Lateran's Basilica, with a canonized Saint Hildebrand at one side and a canonized saint and doctor of the church on the other side, Peter Damian, wrote a bull and published it that says, to avoid these problems in the future, I declare the following now, and taught a principle of jurisprudence of what Catholics are to do when there's an anti-pope at Rome. 967 years ago, and that this bull, the existence of which was long forgotten, was cited by Paul VI. And the other condition is that John Paul II, in his law on papal conclaves, in paragraph 76 says, if you don't follow my law, the election's null and void. But John Paul II then does not have, in number 77, what do you do if the election's void? He doesn't say redo the election. He doesn't say what to do. And this is what I call the security discretion. Because if John Paul II said what to do, those who don't care about the Catholic faith and who want to manipulate the papacy would know what to do. But by not saying it, only those who really are faithful to the magisterium, who really love the church, would find it. But they'd only find it in Latin. And if you're not a Latinist, you can't read it. So here comes an Italian American who happens just to have translated 1,000 pages of Bonaventure medieval Latin, who hears about this bull and finds it, and he translates it and understands it. So I'm not going to fault anyone for not knowing what the solution is. I know the solution as of this summer. I knew the conclave was invalid for my own reasons, but now I found a papal teaching that confirms 100% my position. And I find it was written with the advice of two saints, both of whom I admire greatly. And this is what I call the gift of God. This is the gift of divine providence. These saints lived in communion with God, so they had knowledge of the future. Even if they didn't have particular knowledge of a particular case, they were warned by God that these things would happen again. And they wanted to, since they were men of God who were truly prudent and had heroic virtue, they put in law and in writing a statement which would protect the papacy until the end of time. And I think we can all agree that the papacy has been under control of the globalists for many decades. The faith has been manipulated by Vatican II, at Vatican II, and ever since John the 23rd began reigning. And we can now solve the problem if we can get just 3 or 4 Roman Catholics together to elect the Pope. And this is why we need to all start talking about this. I need you all to start talking about this, because I say this in Italian to Italians, but Italians want to hear it from Americans and not me, because Italy is a complete colony of the United States politically, and Italians are completely terrified. And I'll admit to you, as of tonight, 180 days after the conclave, I cannot find one Italian who is a Catholic at Rome, who, I need 2 of them, to be in the same presence with me to elect the Pope. I have invited 300 Italians that I know to several dinners, meals, meetings. Some will say yes, but eventually all cut out because they're being told by Cianci or Minutella or other people not to attend, not to elect the Catholic Pope. And this is a terrible crisis. And on top of that, who would we elect? It has to be someone the church will accept. I've looked for Catholic bishops who are willing to talk about this. Catholic bishops, I can't find a single Catholic bishop. Lenga hid from me and wouldn't meet with me. One bishop was asked, and he said, well, all the other bishops going along with it, so it's fine by me. 2 cardinals I know as possible wouldn't even respond to letters. So we have the solution. We have the papal teaching. This is how to solve the problem. What are we going to do about it? And I'm willing to do something about it. I need to know who to elect, and I need help getting Catholics together to elect them. And we have to know who to elect first, and then we need the Catholics to get together. And I spent 2,000 euro going to Poland and searching for Archbishop Lenga. I never found him, and his friends who knew where he was wouldn't tell me. I don't know what to make of that. He has a letter from me. He knows what my journal is and stuff. And you, Kay, you're in Poland. I don't know if you know where Lenga is, but you contact the people that know him, and leave comments on his YouTube channels, because I think he would be a good contact if he's not a Polish intel agent or a Russian intel agent or a CIA spy. I don't know his position on that. I know he doesn't think he says Leo is a heretic, but he also calls him Leo the 14th as if he's validly elected. So maybe Lenga is a traditionalist from that point of view. And if that's his position, he either doesn't know what his position is, or it's been fed to him by NATO intelligence agents. So he probably wouldn't want to be elected pope because he just wants to do what his handlers tell him to do, unless he's truly a Catholic. And I'm not saying this to disparage him. Um, you know, I won't mention the names of other individuals because I know that there are very evil people listening to this, and they're trying to find out who we're going to elect and where the election is going to be so they can stop it. I had one benefactor willing to help me, and when he said he was willing to help me, the day later, 3 of his bank accounts were suspended. So I know that the CIA is willing to persecute people bitterly about this, and I can't talk in public about the actual date or discussions or individuals or any of that kind. But I wanted to do this video so that publicly the whole Catholic world might know that the Catholic solution was given to us by Nicholas II. And everyone who's a traditionalist or a sedevacantist or a conservative, whatever your position is in the church, you should agree that this is the solution and this solves the problem. And you need to start talking about it openly on social media. You need to break the silence about this. And I would invite any traditionalist bishop and any sedevacantist bishop to contact me, and I would invite you to come to the election or to meet the individual elected once they're elected. Because once we elect a Catholic Pope of this kind, it will be your salvation. It will be you will be vindicated by such an election, and you will obtain the freedom and the authorization and the blessing of God that you've always wanted. And so will all of us conservatives who want the Catholic religion, not all this mumbo jumbo going on. So it's up to you who are listening to this program to do that. I have run a journal for 10 years. I have proved it all. I've done the translations. I've sent out 11,000 letters to the clergy and religious laity. I have not been able to convince 3 Italians to meet with me to do this election. And I've decided not to do posters because I know that the Vatican it's highly likely the Vatican has asked all the mayors of the province of Rome not to allow my posters to go up, or to allow them to go up so I spend the money and then rip them down within hours so that the funds raised for the project go to waste. And I think it's far better that they be spent to organize the election and help the new Pope with some funds once he gets elected. So that's why I haven't done a poster campaign. And I haven't done a more public campaign like doing public addresses in streets, because I want to do it in a way that canonically we can get this done before any monkey wrenches are thrown in. I won't say anything more than that. So I want to thank you if you have a question now, I will stay on air another 5-10 minutes to answer your questions. Kay, you live in Japan? Oh, okay. Oh, really? Kay, I was to Japan in 2019. Did you know I went to Japan in 2019? I went to Kawasaki, I went to Tokyo, and I went to Akita. And I was telling everyone at From Home, I'm in Japan. Is anyone to meet me? And no one ever contacted me and stuff. And I would have dearly loved to have met you. So Japan is a lovely country. Give me 5 minutes. I'll get something for myself to drink. Okay, so if you have questions, well, you live in Japan, so you can't elect popes. But if you're a woman at Rome, you could participate in the election of a pope. Strangely enough, because Rome, according to the ancient tradition that prevailed up until 1058, had its own unique laws. Oh, you live in Nara province. Okay. Well, I don't know how you say hello in Japanese, but I've been to the Catholic parish there in Tokyo in 2019. I went to the Samurai Museum there in Tokyo. I've always been fascinated by the samurai. I wish I had time to go to the rest of Japan. I'd love to see Kyoto, the Imperial Palace. Philomena Lynn? Yes. She asked me, am I in contact with the person who published the letter to the Italian clergy about the invalid conclave? Yes, I am, but I can't name them for canonical reasons. Because any published statement, the author of whom's identity is confirmed by two or more witnesses, can be used in a canonical process to excommunicate or penalize the person or expel him from the priesthood, or his religious order. That's why I have not published the name of the author of that letter. Because I'm fighting the modernists, but I'm using good tactics. People wonder, why haven't you been excommunicated? This is why. I don't violate the laws. The other reason why I'm not excommunicated is if they excommunicated me, they'd have to announce it in a letter. And I have so many enemies that if they announced it in a letter, all my enemies would publish that letter and they'd start rejoicing about it. And they have millions and millions of followers. And then everyone would know my name and they'd be like, why did the Vatican just excommunicate Alexis Bugnolo? Then people would Google my name and they'd come to From Rome or Chiesa Romana Punto Info. They'd see some of my writings, and then the cat would be out of the bag. Everyone would realize Leo XIV was invalidly elected and how you elected a Catholic Pope. And at the Vatican, they realized that is not a good outcome, so they're not going to mention my name. And if they do, then they're really desperate because that will be the end of them. Philomena, can you collaborate? I mean, can I collaborate with the person who wrote that letter? Yes, I can, and I am collaborating. Okay. Okay. But the papal law requires 3 or more, not 2. I have found your YouTube site only during COVID. Our churches here were closed, and I started looking for masses online and through the internet for Catholic sites, says Kay in Japan. Yes, I became quite famous and notorious during COVID. I think something like 45 million people around the world heard my name because, well, I was arrested like 3 times, and I filed criminal complaints against 28 policemen here at Rome, and I would go through the streets singing Christmas carols. I never followed the lockdown or wore a mask, and I became famous and notorious in the same sense. And it was horrible what was done to that. Japan is one of the few countries where the government actually has come out and admitted and recognized how dangerous were the substances that were recommended during that time. And so I'm very glad to have you, Kay, at my live stream. I guess I don't know if you read from Rome, the info, of course, it's in English. And so I don't know how much sense it makes in Japanese. I don't even know if my arguments make sense in Japanese because your language is so different from English and Latin, whether Catholics in Japan can understand that. But the Japanese are very disciplined. It's a very disciplined society. It's a very law-abiding society. I was really impressed. I call Japan the monastery of the world, because if you go to Japan, you don't hear anyone speaking in public. And it's like you're walking in a monastic garden because everyone is so silent. If I had to find an ATM machine, a machine where you can get cash out, because as you know, in Japan, everyone uses cash, you don't use electronic payments. So I went into a McDonald's and I said out loud, does anyone know where there is a ATM machine, a bankomat machine? Everyone looked at me like, you're speaking in public and you're yelling at us. I was like, who do you think you are? They were so shocked. They were all Japanese. And one night I was really hungry, so I went to a seafood restaurant. I ordered anything they had. And the only thing I could recognize was octopus, so I ordered octopus. And they brought me octopus that was cold and slimy. Well, we Italians only eat it steamed, okay, or boiled. So I said to the waiter, he didn't understand English and I didn't understand Japanese. I said, can you put some fire on this? Can you cook it? And the people in the restaurant, it was a small restaurant. There must have been only like 12 patrons. They looked at me, cook octopus? What do you, I mean, because the Japanese eat it raw. No, I said, cook it. Can you like steam it, boil it 5 minutes? They're like, the cook finally did what I asked. When I was paying my bill, the waiter said to me, don't ever come back to our restaurant. So I had a delightful time in Japan. I was only there for 3 days. As part of my work for Ordo Militaris. It was during those days immediately after the murder of those poor children at Kawasaki, the Catholic school, by that crazy guy who took the samurai sword and slashed at their necks. And I bought my favorite icon of Our Lady, and I donated it to the Catholic school, and they put it in their chapel. And if you go to the chapel of that Catholic school in Kawasaki, you'll see the icon of Our Lady holding the child Jesus that I donated to the school, to show that the members of our order are praying for them. And I gave the principal some advice about how children should arrive at schools to avoid these problems. You know? And I was interviewed by, I think, 2 Japanese newspapers and 2 Japanese television stations, but I don't know if they ever aired my interviews. I know, Ken, isn't that hilarious? Oh boy, that was such the most hilarious thing that happened to me in Japan. But you know, I'm Italian. I have dual citizenship, but I'm 100% Italian by ethnicity and by lineage. And we have very strict rules about how to eat and what seasoning you put on what food. And to be given a plate of raw octopus in front of you. Excuse me, Kay, I don't mean to offend the Japanese, but in the Italian culture, that is barbaric. That is uncivilized. And from a nutritional point of view, if you cook your octopus, you're going to get like 9 times more nutrition out of it than eating it raw, because the cooking breaks down the proteins and elements and allows your body to absorb it better. But I know in the Japanese cuisine, you eat seafood raw, and they've been doing that for tens of thousands of years. So I'm not going to tell them to stop. But we have Italians, we couldn't swallow it. It would, you know, we could swallow it, and I'm sure there's those that eat it, but I can't take it. The Japanese do act very shy, but you know, I think the Japanese act very shy even in presence of their superiors. Japanese society, from my point of view, is very reticent, very respectful, very cautious in social relationships still. still ruled by a lot of customs, ancient customs of behavior. Now, I don't know how you teach discipline in families. And yeah, the attack took place at the end of May in 2019. And I was there on May 31st, June 1st, and June 2nd of 2019. It took place at Kawasaki. And what happened was this crazy man went to the bus stop where the children were waiting for a bus to go to the school. He pulled out a samurai sword and he slashed, I think he injured like 19 of them. One was a teacher he killed, and two were girls. Another was a girl who had her head cut off, I think, or had a mortal wound. Another was, I think there was 3 injuries, 3 or 2. And then like another 18 had horrible scars to their faces and bodies. And hey, when I heard it was a Catholic school, not all the students were Catholics. Many of them may have even been Buddhist. And the principal told me that. But when I heard it, it was just such a terrible thing, And the reason why this guy was able to do that is that the students would mass on this sidewalk waiting for the bus, a sidewalk that could really only hold a certain number. And they were so packed in, there was no room. So all one guy had to do is come there with a sword and start attacking them, and you couldn't miss because they were all there. And there was no one there to defend them. And the funny thing is, why are they? Because they had just come out of the subway, and they're at the subway station. They were waiting for the bus to take them to school. Now, the school isn't more than like a half mile away, so you could walk there, though it's slightly uphill. But instead of doing that, the students would wait for the bus because they have to do it every day, And this guy was like crazy. So he had never gotten married. His girlfriend had dumped him, and he kept writing the Japanese symbol for sacrifice. Oh no, no, not for sacrifice. It was something like the Japanese symbol for honor. And the Japanese symbol for honor is made up for the Chinese symbols, meaning to sacrifice by cutting the neck of a lamb or a sheep, okay, from an old Chinese symbol for due respect in religion, okay. And so this guy's in his crazy mind read that symbol of, if I want to be an honorable man, I have to go out and cut the necks of lambs, And so he went to this bus stop with a samurai sword and attacked these girls. And my viewpoint of that was so interesting to the Japanese press. I got 4 interviews. And in the short time I was there, which was only like a couple hours or 2, I said the office of the dead for the children who died. I said that in Latin. So that attracted the attention of the Japanese press because they see this monk from the United States dressed like this, praying in Latin for these children. And that was just so fascinating too, because the Japanese have a big respect for Buddhist monks and spirituality. That's one of the, when the Japanese realize that Jesus Christ is our true Lord and Savior, Japan will convert so quickly and become such devout Catholics. It will be absolutely amazing because the Japanese are such an excellent people, and they have such an excellent character. The only thing that keeps them from converting is they don't know that Jesus Christ is the living God, the creator of the world. So the symbol might have been sashimi. Yeah, I forget what it was. I think I wrote about it from Rome in 2019, but I forget what the symbol was. But if you ever get to the school in Kawasaki and go to the chapel, take a photo if you see that icon of Our Lady holding the child Jesus that I left there. Okay, I don't know why you didn't hear this. Of course, this was 2019, before the pandemic broke out. And it made the news here in the West because attacks against Christian schools, terrorist attacks, are in the news. But it wasn't perhaps reported so widely in Japan because, you Japanese, you feel very much ashamed when something like this happens in your country. So the Japanese, it's not like we Americans, we hear about this, we tell everyone we know on the same day, we share it on Facebook. My sense is in Japanese culture, when something like this happens, you don't talk about it. because it's considered shameful. It's considered a dishonor to the Japanese people that something like this happened. You know, if the guy who did the attack was from Africa or from China or so, you know, the guy who did it was a native of Kawasaki. Okay, and Kawasaki in Japan is a city. For those who don't know, that's why the motorcycle is called Kawasaki, because it's made by Kawasaki Motor Works in Japan, in that town. And the whole time I was in Japan, no one spoke to me. Of course, I don't know a word of Japanese, but except when I was on my way to this school, there was this old lady, and she started speaking to me in English. And I said to these other Japanese next to me, no one's ever spoke to me in English. That's because he says, she's crazy. And so she was speaking to me in English, saying, why are you wearing that clothing and stuff? I said, oh, I'm a monk. Are you interested in Christianity? As soon as I said the word Christianity, she said, you foolish people. You believe these crazy religions about a man being tied to a tree. I mean, what kind of religion is that? So I'd love to be a missionary in Japan and sit, although I don't know Japanese, and sit down and talk to Japanese and explain it all, because it is, the Japanese culture is so different from Western culture. And although I'm trained in cultural anthropology, that it would be delightful to me to try to explain it in their terms and to start that conversation. Matter of fact, I became a religious because I wanted to be a missionary in China. I never got to be a missionary in China. I've always wanted to be a missionary in the Orient. That was my dream of dreams, but it never happened. God sent me to Rome. Do other things. So, any other questions about how to solve the problem at Rome? Please share the Bull of Nicholas II. And that way Catholics can solve this problem and this year reign of madness. And with that, I will salute everyone. It's been 2.5 hours. I'll let you go. I know it's late there in the East Coast of the United States. It's already past midnight. God bless, and Ave Maria and sayonara.